For some reason, I want to make a bowling ball animation. Don't ask me why, but I want to make the bowling ball and the pins and the simulation, and the start of that, of course, begins with the bowling ball. So, this tutorial is going to teach you how to make a fucking bowling ball. I don't know if you need a tutorial on this, but we're going to be talking about how to do this in a procedural fashion, which I don't think is something a lot of people cover. So, let's get into it. Bowling ball, it's probably not a cube, it's probably a sphere. So let's get rid of the cube and instead add in a sphere. For this geometry, by the way, this is not the geometry I'm going to use to drive the simulation. We'll talk about that in 2 tutorials from now, just forget about it. Even if that's the case, right? We do want this to be a smoother thing, because if this was simulated, it'd be like very jagged. It'd be like flying everywhere. Some kid would be hit in the line of fire, you know? So I'm just going to take this and multiply the segments by 2, and you can just type this in right here, and also the rings by 2. And look at that. That's a smooth bowling ball. Make it shade smooth. Okay. Now, really the only other modeling we need to do, most of this is going to be like procedural shading and stuff. The only other modeling we need to do is make 3 holes. And by the way, I loaded in reference because I'm a professional. The holes come in very different shapes and sizes. You know, some people have very lengthy, kind of slender man fingers. You wouldn't want them touching you. And some boys have thicky fingers, right? Point is, the distance between these 2 varies depending on the bowling ball, but what seems to be the same is these 2 are closer than the third one, and sometimes the third hole is bigger. So that is what we're going to try to emulate, I guess. To do this, we are going to use a trick that is going to make your life super easy. Listen, I'm not going to do the topology thing, right? We're not going to mess around with this and take forever just to cut some circles. Here's the fast way of doing it. You're going to need this tool over here, and chances are you do not have that. By the way, 2.92 alpha, make sure you're using 2.83 or above, I believe. You're not going to have this tool by default, I don't believe. If you do not have it, go to Edit Preferences and then Experimental. If you don't have Experimental, in Interface, make sure to enable Developers Extra. You can see it's kind of like a little Konami code right there. Whatever. Make sure you enable that and then the Add Object tool, okay? And that's going to give you this tool. The reason it's useful is we can click Add Cylinder. This is the object that's going to cut out of it. And the point of this is if we draw on a cylinder, it does it along the normal of the mesh, which looks weird from this like orthographic view. Let me see if I can get back there. It looks weird from the orthographic view, but generally it's fine. So this again lets us add in a cylinder off the normal. Otherwise we'd have to like do it manually and it'd suck. So yeah, that's the use of it. So I'm going to add in 2, actually just 1. We want this to be procedural. 1 circle, let's say around here. So I'm going to click, I'm going to drag shift to make it a 1:1 aspect ratio base, which is what we want. We want it to be a circle, not a cylinder. So, whoops. So again, click, drag, shift, and then also Alt, I think it's Alt, centers it on the selection, which is useful if you really want to pick the spot by hand. So Shift and Alt, and then I'm just going to drag it out like that. Okay? So now we have a cylinder that has a circular base coming out of this, and we can actually up the vertices a bit. 48, I didn't even do this in the original, but that's fine. We're going to take this, and we want to move it inwards towards the cylinder. And you're like, oh, how do we do that? We can only move Z, X, Y, stuff like that. You dummy. Change to local coordinate system. Okay, this is the trick. So this cylinder, since it's oriented weirdly, has its own coordinate system where now on local coordinates, Z-axis goes inwards and outwards. It's a beautiful trick. So we just bring this inwards. Imagine that this is being cut out of it. And just so you know what we're doing here, let me just hide this so it's invisible. It's still there. I just clicked H. And then on the sphere, I'm going to add in a Boolean modifier. By the way, we need to save our progress. Wouldn't want to lose the super valuable progress. This is like when you're like 99% through Dark Souls. That's the stakes we're dealing with. Bowling ball. Anyways, Boolean set to difference with our cylinder is going to cut in a hole. And do not worry about the topology. We're going to fix it. We're going to make the shading errors go away. We're going to make the shade smooth happen and the bevels. Don't worry about it. But for now, you can see it cuts a hole into here. If we want 2 holes, you're thinking, oh, we need to add in another cylinder and make sure it's perfect. No. You don't need to do that. If we look at our cylinder and in fact add a mirror modifier, and I heard from a little birdie, if you click M, nope, guess it wasn't true. I heard from a little birdie, if you click M, mirror modifier happens, but I guess that's not the shortcut. what we want to do is add in a mirror modifier so that we can copy the cylinder over to the other side procedurally, right? So we can like move it around and it gets mirrored. Of course, it doesn't really matter what axis we pick here. It's going to not work for any of these because I think it uses local coordinates or something like that. Point is, we want to flip it over the z-axis, or in other words, along the x-axis. So I'm just going to add in an empty that's on the center that has the normal orthonormal coordinate system, the basis. I don't know, there's a name for this in Calc 3. Point is, with your cylinder, now our mirror object is going to be this empty, and that's going to make everything just fine. So we can mirror on the x-axis, which is what we want, or you could do it on the y-axis if you're like, trying to make that Megatron, I don't know, the magnet Pokemon, you know what I'm talking about. We mirror on the x-axis, and if we hide this, you can see that the Boolean, since it's applied after we do this mirroring to our cylinder, it works out perfectly. Why is this useful? It's useful because, first of all, we get symmetry, and second of all, we can move this, and the holes move procedurally. You heard me, procedurally, okay? So now let's add in the third hole, again, using this tool. I'm going to select, I guess here, depends on the bowling ball, but I'm going to do this, again, Shift, for circular base, Alt, and I guess we want it to be either the same or slightly bigger. We can always go back and fix this. I mean, I guess not if we bake in the geometry, but whatever. Now it's looking like an anteater or something, or some kind of like Pac-Man who's like trying to suck up something from a straw. I don't know. Again, another cylinder. We just take this, and I guess it's already 48 vertices. I guess it's good to have that in common. On local coordinates, z-axis moves inwards, and just like last time with the sphere, we're just going to stack in another Boolean modifier set to our second cylinder. We hide it, and now we have a completely procedural boy. Now, we could keep it like this and fix the shading errors and stuff like this. By the way, we do shade smooth, and I don't know if this will fix it automatically, but if we enable this setting, I guess it does. It automatically fixes our normals. One thing that I guess isn't shade smoothed is the cylinders themselves, and I believe that's because for some weird reason we need to actually shade smooth these objects as well. I think that's the case. So we hide it, and now you see we have a completely procedural boy. Now, again, you could keep it like this. You could parent the cylinders to the sphere, and everything's, gonna stay there, and you can move stuff at any point. But for demonstration purposes, just know that's possible. But we're not gonna do that, okay? So once we're happy with this, in fact, I think I might move these original cylinders a bit closer to each other, this time on global coordinates, so we actually know what we're doing, so like closer together on the x-axis, but not so they're touching, just so they're a tiny bit closer. Once we do that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control A both of these, or you could just apply, doing 2 clicks like a loser, Control A, boom. And now we actually don't need our cylinders. Again, you could keep the cylinders, keep it procedural, but whatever. Okay, next thing you're probably wondering is, okay, our topology's trash. We want a bevel. If we try it normally, it's not going to work. If we do it with a bevel modifier, it's not going to work, right? How are we going to do this? Again, boys, we're going to keep it procedural. Don't worry. I'm going to show you an easy trick for this. So, turns out the rest of this is actually shading, including the bevel. We're actually done with modeling. So shading workspace, render, get rid of that light, and we're going to switch over to a nicer looking scene. So I'm going to switch to cycles GPU. And for our lighting, instead of a light, and of course you want to use the lights, but because I'm lazy, I'm just going to add in an HDRI from, you know it, HDRI Haven, and I guess I'll pick some interior one, since usually you see bowling balls inside, unless your neighbor is, a nuisance and bowling outside, he's been arrested multiple times, but you always watch out the window because he's pretty good. Film, transparent. Now we have our basic lighting setup. And of course, normal bowling alley lighting is kind of like more directional, so these holes are going to be a bit darker. It just so happens that this HDRI has a lot of like light leaking in everywhere. But whatever, lighting you can always change later. How do we give this shading, make it look like a bowling ball, and give it bevels, which is actually the more interesting part? Well, first of all, I'm going to apply a material. This is just the material it already had. We changed the color, does the thing. By the way, I guess this is a pretty good beginner tutorial. Am I going to overthrow the donut tutorial with this one? It's possible. What was the point? The point is, how do we do the bevels? Well, there's this nifty little node. By the way, 2.92 alpha has recently had a patch that if you are using optics, by the way, I know nobody cares, but if you're using optics and not CUDA, before bevel node and also ambient occlusion node didn't work, but now they do. You can see the bevel node kind of uses normal information and almost seems to define this edge loop for all three of these, and in fact, it does. It really is that good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this bevel node, which you can see outputs normal information, so it takes our normals and kind of updates them, just so you know what I'm talking about. Here is the normal coordinates. This is what they look like, and this is a slightly altered version that you can see almost applies a bevel in texture coordinates. So before, after, right? We take this and apply it to the normal coordinates of the BSDF, right? Tic-tac-toe. And you can see that already it's kind of trying to do a bevel. It doesn't look great, but we can fix it up a bit. First thing we do is we add in samples, since I guess this is a I don't know what the word is, but it's an effect that takes calculations to do. It's not immediate, so we're going to up the samples. Second of all, this radius affects how much bevel there is. So if it's 0, we're not going to have much. If it's 0.02, we're going to have a bit. And in fact, that might actually be what we want. I don't think we want too much. And especially when we zoom out, you can see this kind of fakes a bevel that looks very good and actually has nothing to do with topology because it's all based off normal coordinates, which is super nice. So yeah, this is how we do it procedurally. I'm gonna keep it like 0.35 or so, 0.35 or something like that. And yeah, it really is cool. No matter how we rotate it and all that, since normal coordinates move with it, so do the new bevel coordinates. Okay. So now we have a nice way to do that. For the actual color of this, I guess before we do that, just some general principles. We'll start off with a black bowling ball. If we go back to my reference, you can see that bowling balls are actually super, super shiny, almost like perfectly reflective, but not quite, especially if there's a bit of dust on it. And a lot of them are just like a solid color. So we'll start off with that and then do something interesting, okay? So again, these things have very shiny surfaces, so we want to take the roughness and not necessarily lower it to 0 where it's a mirror ball, but something like 0.2 or maybe even a bit lower, just so it's super reflective, but there's just a tiny bit of blur, and it's not a mirror ball, so I'm going to stick with a 0.15. And again, if you didn't bake in the cylinders procedurally, you can always... I mean, I'm regretting this so far because, like, your thumb, you have to be like Andre the Giant over here to get your thumb in there to perfectly fit. But either way, you could change this if you didn't do what I did. But we're just going to stick with it. Right now, we're all in material mode. We have this shiny black material. You could add a clear coat because I think bowling balls might even have a clear coat. I don't even know. But you could add in a clear coat just for an extra layer of, like, shininess, like a thin film on top. You could do that, but just to make this a bit more interesting, a couple surface imperfections you could do is if you mess with the roughness, we can, wow, there's construction going on outside. Construction going on outside. There seems to be construction going on in my mouth too. A quick way to add a bit of dust. Noise texture, which, you know, simulates some noise that actually is using generated coordinates, so it moves with it. You connect this to the roughness, and let's look at that. And I guess one thing we want to do is filter this a bit. So I'm just gonna, not using a color ramp or anything, just a power node. This is base. If we add in a number that's bigger than 1, you can see it adds in a bit of contrast. Let's add in some detail and a bit of roughness. Set this to like 5 or something, just so it's super contrasty. I'm gonna connect this to the roughness, see what that looks like. I guess we still can't see it too powerfully yet. So take this, and then we're going to multiply it by some number bigger than 1. So you can see when we go up to like 4 or something, you have some areas that are super shiny and some areas that are a bit dusty and a bit blurred. And this is a good way to simulate surface imperfections. You can make it so it has more of these, etc. And yeah, you could keep it at that and then just change the color of the bowling ball if you want like a simple thing. So yellow bowling ball with some dusty imperfections, or a blue one, etc. Any level of vibrance. I think usually bowling balls are a bit darker. You could do stuff like that, or, and I guess we'll keep this for later, so I'm just gonna Shift P that, tuck it away. Or what we could do is actually give it a design, and the nice thing about bowling balls is most of them are really just distorted noise textures. I don't know if you ever noticed, which is super convenient for us because we don't need to do anything fancy, right? Bowling balls are designed badly, so we're gonna design them badly. So noise texture. This time I will use a color ramp since I'm also going to be messing with the color. So you just bring these handles closer together. It will effectively up the contrast. I'm going to add detail. I'm going to add roughness. And most importantly, first of all, let's connect this to the base color so you can see it's actually texturing this. Most importantly, I'm going to add in some distortion, which is what makes it look super stylized and like a bowling ball. You can pick what you want. Something like 0.7, 0.5, something like that is good enough for now. And let's play around with the colors. I really like the look of, like, there was this pink and white. I don't know if it's going to be here. I think it was similar to this. It wasn't necessarily this one. There's a pink and white bowling ball that I super like, so let's do that. For the black, I'm going to make that color white. So again, we still have the same contrast. We're just changing the colors. and for the other one, I'm going to make it slightly pink. And we're not seeing it because I guess we need more contrast, so you bring it closer, and maybe bring the white further away so there's not as much, and there's a bit more fade. And you can see we already have a super simple bowling ball. Again, this is procedural. You can control the look of this with a bit of roughness. And in fact, I think roughness is the trick to making it look pretty realistic. So this is with low roughness, super well-defined lines. We don't actually want that. We want like these blurred lines. That's a controversial song. We can also up the scale or down the scale for the design, right? So we can make it so there's a lot of detail or there's only a couple swoops. I think I'm gonna keep it at like something a bit lower than 5. Detail, stuff like that. You get the drill. You just mess around with these, and you can also mess around with the colors and stuff like that. A couple other ideas. I'm gonna stick with this one, but a couple other ideas to add a bit of interest. Voronoi texture. We're going to mess with the texture coordinates that are inputted here. So you can see if we just do this, we already get something that's pretty interesting with these circles. All we need to do is mix this with the original generated coordinates. So I'm just mixing these two together, even though one's a vector and one's a scalar float. I don't care. I just do what I want. We're going to mix these together. One side is going to have the rings, one side's going to have the normal thing. And if we just mix them slightly, you can see we kind of get a mixture of both where we kind of have these rings. So we can keep that low at 0.1, and it just adds a bit more visual interest than something like 0 would. Maybe it's a bit more clear with 0.2. So you can mess around with this, do a bunch of stuff. As Ducky 3, I feel like this, again, I say this all the time, but whenever I'm doing like super kind of simple noise materials that look pretty good, I'm always like, this is a Ducky tutorial, and that's nice to think about. Wow, he looks surprised. Gasp! Point is, again, all this could be procedural. I know I keep saying it, but that's the point. And also this material is all based off generated coordinates. If it's not, make sure it is. So generated coordinates. You don't actually need these here, but it is. The point is, no matter how we rotate it, the texture is actually, or the noise is going to actually stick with it, which is pretty important, okay? I'm just going to re-add in, you could either re-add in your like roughness thing, just to add a bit of random dust, and this is what I would recommend, or you could actually plug this in right here, so the dust actually corresponds with the areas that are pink and white. Wouldn't recommend that. So I'm just going to plug this in right here. And then final thing, and this is just a tiny detail, just to make it look a bit more bowling ball-like, is other than the bevel thing, I want to mess with the coordinates just a tiny bit more. So we're just going to add in one more noise texture. For this one, I'm going to make it super tiny, so like 100. You can see it makes all these dots. And if we send this through a bump node, we can send this float or height information, so height information, and turn it into normal information, which again, we want to modify with our bevel. And I don't know if order of operations here matters, so you either plug this in here or literally exactly the opposite. We can actually test with both. I know it's looking horrible. We'll fix it in a second. First of all, I want to add in a bit more, just so it's a bit more tiny, and then we want to take the strength and then lower it. And probably even a bit more, but this is just going to add a tiny bit of surface inconsistency, which it really shouldn't have that much. So let's divide that by 2. Just a very tiny bit, because this thing isn't perfect. I mean, I know it's supposed to be. That's the point of a bowling ball. You want it to be this frictionless thing. So I'm going to even lower it a tiny bit more, but all things have a tiny bit of surface imperfection. That's just the thing. Make it even smaller. There you go. So that's just going to add in a bit of something. So if we didn't have this before, it's kind of like perfectly smooth after. Just adds a bit of visual interest. And again, I'm not quite sure about the order of operations. I mean, this looks fine, is the point. If you want to experiment, you just connect this normal to this normal. So now the bump incorporates our bevel information and also adds in the height with some scalar, for the strength. It seems like there's probably is a correct way to do this. I think I'm going to stick with this one to stay safe. But at least at these scales, it doesn't seem to matter. By the way, if somebody knows, comment below. I'd be interested. I probably won't read it, but other people would be interested for sure. And yeah, that's kind of like the basis of the bowling ball. Once we have some color here, I think we could even play around with making the roughness like less intense, like closer to 0. But I think I'm happy with the way this looks. So you now know how to make a bowling ball procedurally. Maybe keep the cylinders. You'd have to parent it to the sphere. Maybe don't. But yeah. That's a tutorial, and I think for the next one I'm going to do the pins, and then I want to do the simulation, or I'll just quit here, we'll see. But yeah, you now know how to make a bowling ball, and I guess it's time for me to wrap up the tutorial. If you enjoyed, That's a good thing. But also, I just want to mention Patreon exists. You're going to get the blend file over there for this project. I think I'm going to clean this up a bit more, maybe keep it procedural. Get the blend file so you don't have to make it yourself, and also with the pins and the simulations. Once we do that, also access to all other blend files I've ever uploaded. Become a patron. Any blend I've ever made, you get that. Also exclusive tutorials that are on neither channel, and also a tutorial series, or I guess a paid course that I made a while ago. That's there for, not for free, but you get that as a patron. You don't have to pay anything more. Also exclusive tutorials I upload a couple times a month. Additionally, early access to some videos, behind the scenes, stuff like that. And I just want to give credit to everybody who already is, all 570 some of you. Bless all of you. I'm tired of making this bowling ball. I want to get out of here. So hopefully you enjoyed. See ya.